In this problem, I want to take something like secant squared x minus tangent squared x divided by cosecant x. There's a couple of ways that I could go about this. I'm going to show this with two ways. Way one is probably going to be the easier way, but it's going to be one that you may not always be able to do. I know for me, I wouldn't be able to do it without this little chart up here because I don't memorize everything except for this identity. But our numerator, we have secant squared minus tangent squared. So we may remember one of our other identities is 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared. If I solve this for 1, so subtract tangent squared from both sides, I end up with 1 equals secant squared minus tangent squared. So that means that my numerator, this part right here, would just be equivalent to 1. And then over cosecant x, and we know that 1 divided by cosecant is going to be the sine of x. That's the quicker way, but it requires you to memorize this fact right here, knowing that that's 1. I don't usually do that, and I usually tell my students to stick with converting everything to sines and cosines. So way 2, you're going to find this to be a little tougher, but just know that if you don't know that secant squared x minus tangent squared x equals 1, this might be another way to do it. So secant squared x we know is 1 over cosine squared x. Tangent squared we know is sine squared x over cosine squared x. My denominator, cosecant x, is just 1 over sine x. And I know you might be thinking, ooh, this looks ugly. Well, if we look at the top, we can see that we have a common denominator. So I'll just write that as 1 minus sine squared x over cosine squared x. Now my denominator, I'm dividing this by a fraction, so I'll multiply by the reciprocal of that. And when I look here, I can see, oh, 1 minus sine squared x, that is, so 1 minus sine squared x is cosine squared x. Here, let me use a different color here. Okay, it's that identity. And I know that because sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. So this part right here is just cosine squared x. So I'll just rewrite that. And now you can see why these things cancel out to just give us 1 times sine x over 1, which is just sine x. I know that's not the easier way to do this, but it will get you the same thing in the end. All right, so that is how we would do this problem. So again, you can choose which way you do. Obviously, you will have access to this chart. So if you choose to use this chart, because how can I stop you? You could have figured out the secant squared x minus tangent squared x without having to rewrite everything as sines and cosines. So if you see an identity and you know that identity and you want to use that identity, you're welcome to do so. In the end, we're still going to get the same thing. All right, that's all I got for this one.